Hi everyone, this is Xenon with episode 1 of How to Code in GD. So, whenever you play Geometry Dash, sometimes you find levels that are games inside GD. Most people don't even know how to make them. So I wanted to start a new series in tutorials on how to make games in GD. Now this one's just pretty much the basics that you need to know when making a level, like games like this. And basically, when people see them in the editor, people have no clue what they're doing, but all these triggers actually have a purpose in games. So we're gonna start off with the basics. So first off, in my opinion, the most important triggers needed for coding are the spawn, stop, touch, and collision. Now obviously you use more than this in coding in GD, but these are the big ones, I'd say. So first off, we'll start with the spawn trigger. Basically what this trigger does is it will activate any group. Like, let's say we have a spike here and we want it to toggle when we pass the toggle trigger. What a spawn trigger could do, let's say the toggle trigger, well, here we'll put a few more spikes so you can't pass it. Let's say the toggle trigger's here. You could spawn that toggle trigger like from over here. So when you pass the spawn trigger, it activates this trigger, which will just toggle these when you pass the spawn instead of that one. And that one is very helpful in games because you could activate things no matter where you are in the level. Next is the stop trigger. This trigger stops any group from doing any action. Like, let's say this is currently moving. You use the stop trigger to stop, like, let's just say the move trigger that's moving this, and it will stop this from moving. You could also do it with other triggers like alpha, pulse, pretty much any. Next is the touch trigger. This one is probably one of the most important because that's how you touch the screen, and whatever game someone made does that reaction, like maybe it moves an object a certain direction when you tap a certain side of the screen. So this one could be a bit confusing to some people. There's a dual mode, which depends which side you tap, but you'll need 2-player mode on if you're doing that. Next is the collision trigger. This one involves collision blocks right here. Now, let's say right here, this is your player in a game. You would set this collision block to a number, and let's say there's another one right here, and we want that to be a wall. When this is moving, we could set it so that collision trigger could stop this from moving past that. That's how walls are made, and you could collect things pretty much. I'm going to show an example now of how to use all of them. So first off, we'll start with the spawn again. We're going to set these spikes to 1. We're going to put a toggle trigger right here, and we're going to set it to 1. So now when you pass the toggle, it will toggle the spikes. Now we're going to put it on the other side of the spikes, so basically this wouldn't be possible. Now you're going to get a spawn trigger. Now, when you go to edit object in a trigger, you notice there's a spawn trigger. So what you have to do, you set a spawn trigger to a new group, so we set it to 2. There's also a delay, so you could set how long it'll activate after. So now that we set the spawn trigger to 2, you go to the toggle and set it to that group. Set it to 2, but then you have to go to, and inside the toggle trigger, you have to hit spawn triggered. Now, multi-triggered means you could use this over and over again. This, if it just has spawn triggered on, it means you can only toggle or spawn that once. If you have multi-triggered, you could do it as many times as you want. But for this case, we only need it on spawn triggered. So when you pass the spawn trigger, it toggles that. It activates this trigger. You could put a delay too, hold on, we put it here. You could add a delay, 1 second. So it will activate this trigger 1 second after it passes the spawn trigger. Now, obviously that was probably too late, so we could put it at 0.5. You could put it in like 2 seconds. So that's basically how the spawn trigger works. Next is the stop trigger. We're gonna put a block right here, and we're gonna set it to a group 1. Now we're gonna make the block move a few blocks forward, so we're gonna set this to 1, make it move, how about 5 blocks in 2.5 seconds. How about a little faster? So 1 second, so it's moving like that. Now this also, well, this doesn't, you don't need to put spawn triggered for this. Now the stop trigger, you also just set it to a new group. Also, I also forgot to say, with the spawn trigger, you could spawn other spawn triggers as well. And yeah, the stop trigger, so we set this to 2, so you have to set the move to 2. So when you pass the stop trigger, it will stop the move trigger and stop this from moving. So I'll put the stop trigger right here. And you noticed it stopped when I passed the stop trigger. I could put it forward more. I could put it here. That's how to use the stop trigger. Next is the touch. This one could be more confusing to learn, but basically you go to a new group. Well, first off, let's place an object. Let's say we want it to move to the right when we hold up down on the screen. We're going to set it to 1. Now we set this to a new group, which is 2. Now you could make this so, like, let's say you tap the screen and it moves 1 block forward. Or you could have hold mode on, so when you hold down, it keeps moving. So we're going to have hold mode on, and this has to have toggle on. I like using arrows when I code in GD because it helps, I think, with the formatting of the triggers. So now that that's there, we want it to move. First off, I'm going to make 1, just follow your player. So, yeah, okay. Now, this touch trigger is set to 2, so let's place a move here. And this is set to 1, so we have to move 1. Let's say we want it to move 50 blocks in, how about 75 seconds? Well, first off, I'm going to see how fast that is. Okay, that's pretty slow. How about 25? Okay, that should be fine. Now, the touch trigger does spawn things, so you do have to put spawn triggered on for this to work. And we want this to be used over and over again, so it has to have spawn trigger and multi-trigger on. So now the touch trigger is set to 2, so set the move to 2. So now, I'll tell you when I touch the screen. So I touched it now, I'm holding down. But you notice when I let go now, it keeps moving. So the way to solve this is you could take a spawn trigger right here, set it to a new group, so set it to 3, keep the delay at 0, and it's going to just spawn this move instead, so it's going to spawn move 1. Now, this has to be set to 2, which is the group of this, has to have spawn trigger and multi-trigger on. Okay, good. Now, you're going to copy this touch trigger, and we're going to set it to a new group. We're going to set it to 4. Now this one has to have toggle off on it. And then you're going to grab a stop trigger, place it here, and it has to be the same group as this spawn trigger. So we set this to 3, spawn trigger, multi-trigger, and this is the touch. So basically what toggle off means is when you let go, that's when it activates something. Toggle on means when you hold down, it'll activate it. When you let go, this will activate. So when we let go, it's going to stop it from moving. So we're going to set this to 4 because that's the group of the touch trigger. Make sure it has, yeah, spawn trigger, multi trigger. Now when you play, I'm holding, letting go. Holding, letting go. Holding, letting go. So that's how you use the touch trigger. If you want it to move another direction, that's why there's a dual mode, but you'll have to have 2-player mode on. and that's the touch trigger. Actually, I'm going to leave this here for now because I'm going to show you something with it. Let me just hide your player real quick. Okay, so yeah, that's going to move. Now, I'm going to go to a different layer. Now, we're going to do the collision trigger. So, I made a tutorial on this one before, but I'm going to show you in this one too. So, let's set it to a new block. So if you want to set one to a new block or you don't know which one is not used, just hit the plus and that'll give you the next free one. Now, one of the blocks has to have dynamic block on it. So we're going to just, in this case, put it to this one. And keep it as the same group as this block so it moves when you hold down. So, for instance, like this, you see when I hold down, it moves with it. Now, I'm going to copy it, turn dynamic block off, and set it to a new one. So hit the plus, and it's 2. Now, we're going to just make this follow your player. So we set it to a new group, 5, and just make 5 follow. So basically, your block will move, but that stays there. Now look, when you go through it, when you pass it, you just go through it. We want it to stop this block when you touch it for a wall. So now, with the collision trigger, you're going to go to a new group, 6. So target ID is 6. Now, there's block A and block B. So that's the 2 blocks. So we have 1 and 2. So we set block A to 1, block B to 2. We want this to activate group. Trigger on exit means when this, let's say the collision block is right here, it's not going to activate anything. When it goes off the collision block, it'll activate it. So that's trigger on exit, but we're not using that. So we just want activate on. We're going to get an arrow, and in this case, we're going to use a stop trigger because we want to stop the move when you pass it. So we leave it on 3 because we already have 3 stopping it. So we're going to set this to 6 now because that's the group of the collision trigger. Make sure it has spawn trigger, multi-trigger on. Now, I'm going to hold down. I'm still holding, but you see when I touched it, it stopped now. But look, if you hold down, you could go through it. So, just to fix this, just get one move trigger that is set to that block and just make it move back like a 1/10 of a block instantly. Make sure it's set to 6. And so, if you look, so now if I keep tapping, I'm trying to get past, it doesn't let me. That's how you make a wall. Anyway, that is pretty much the basics of coding with a few of the triggers. The next episode will have more about them. It's going to show more advanced things, what you could do with them. But thank you all for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will have the other episodes out soon. So see you later, guys. Bye.